Before we talk about how versatile berms and basins are and why I'm making a garden right next to the goats, let's look at the goats for a second. Something interesting is you'll see the baby goats get out because I'm trying to train them, but I need to cut this section in half. But the baby goats always go back because they're herd animals. They want to be part of the herd. I'm Justin Hitt from Prosperity Homestead. One of the things that you need to do for food security and to get the most out of your land, especially if you don't have a lot of land, you have under 5 acres, is to not follow the herd, is to do something a little different, even risky, some might say. And that's where the berms and basin system comes in. So we want to think beyond ourselves. So I was going to come in here and dump this out because the goats aren't in here. The goats are over there. The goats have water over there. They also have the nursing corral, and they have a little bit of grass, which goats typically don't eat grass. Otherwise, this grass would be like gone already. So we're constantly feeding them hay. Now the hay comes waste because we've been having lots and lots and lots of rain, and part of our mosquito management, and it helps if you draw this out on a diagram, but part of our mosquito management is to dump out water that is not being used to water the animals. I may take this out with a bucket and put it in this water over here, but now I got an electric fence. So I was going to dump this on the ground. I said, well, you know what I should do? Because we grow grass after the goats have been through, I'm going to show you how we can use berms and basins, not only to catch this water, slow it, soak it into the ground, but turn it into something valuable. So we have a couple different things here that we're going to plant. I'm not going to have 100% on the video. I want you to just get an understanding of it so you can get outside and do it yourself. But those are some potato eyes, some cutoffs of different plants that are replant, some King Kong. That's going to go in the first bed. Now each of these beds are berms with basins around them. So it's almost like a micro-Chinampa. A Chinampa is a Mexican system that actually fed thousands and thousands of people, where they would take the organic waste from the cities, compost it into floating islands or different islands that they had built out in a canal system. They had canals instead of highways, and the fish in the canals would be food and the floating islands would grow food. So it's kind of like that. It's also kind of like just simple scratch farming. I've used a hoe. The secret about a hoe is you turn it slightly when you're going down to trench something out. But essentially I trench out this top edge, and then I come around, I trench out a little bit of a bottom edge, and the size of the beds are based on the length of the hoe handle and my height. So technically you could reverse engineer and figure out how tall I am based on how far the beds are apart. But the point is that the beds are a defined growing space. Now, why is that? Well, first off, if I come in here with a tiller, I'm going to have a hell of a time. I don't want to have a tiller. In fact, all of the berm and basin system is about growing up instead of digging down. We want to mature our garden beds and our growing areas, not constantly beat them down, such as happens with a tiller. Now, again, there are environments where we'll shallow till to terminate a crop. There are environments where when we initially put in beds, we might till and then broad fork, and then never till again. And we might come back later and broad fork it. That's why we were offering the tiller service for a while, because some people just want to get established with a garden, and the tilling was a fast way to get established. But a better way would have been to trench around where you want your garden beds, mound compost, cardboard, whatever it is, as a weed barrier, layer straw and everything like a lasagna bed on top. See, the berm and basin system is the foundation of the lasagna bed, of the Chinampa, of all of these other systems, because again, it slows and spreads water. Now, the berm and basin system is also a microcosm of our silvopasture system. You might be asking, why are these beds so far apart? So this bed is, we're going to talk a little bit about why this one has grass on it, but there's this wide gap here, and we've shown you in other berms and basins, in another garden area. Why is there this wide path? And then another bed. You would think I could grow more plants if I grow closer. Well, I had this neighbor growing up who's from West Africa, and the father was standing outside with a stick, kind of like, just staking something in the ground. And that stick was in the ground, and what turned out to be the corner of his garden bed. And he'd come outside and look at the stick every so often. So me and the other kids are playing, we're having a good time. And he'd come out and look at the stick every so often. He'd look at the stick every so often. He had a couple sticks on each corner where his garden beds were, and he was working on getting at least one of the beds out. And he's looking at this stick, and what he was doing is looking at the solar aspect. So based on the height of what might grow in that bed. So we're going to grow corn and okra and things like that. Now, there's not a lot of sun out to see it, because when the sun's out, my phone overheats. But imagine there's sun out here. Where would the sun want us to plant taller crops and plant shorter crops? See, the materials in this little basket here are kitchen scraps. And you can replant a lot of different kitchen scraps. And so there's a concept called a kitchen scrap garden that we're going to put in here, but it tends to be low height things, about knee high. So if the sun comes from over my back, I want the low items in the front. I want the taller items in the back, or the tallest items in the back. So this informs me, and again, from West Africa, there's a lot of sun, and they have, it's a temperate climate as well as where we're at right now. But when they have rain, they have gushing, pouring down rain. When they have sun, they have baking hot sun. They have sun for more hours of the year. So the wider paths help with solar aspect, but it also provides a shady place and a lot of room for you to tend the garden. So when you're walking through here and you have the beds are just overflowing, because again, the water, the basins slow and spread the water, and you've got everything touching the edges. You're not having these plants touch you all the time. You're not transferring disease because a wet person and a wet plant mixing. Another factor is important too, is because we're out in a goat pen, and so we've got the solar aspect, and this is again permaculture stacking a function. The big wide beds allow us to bring in bulk materials and have a place to put it. So I can come in here, I could plant clover in this wide bed, and as the clover grows, chop and drop it onto the beds. I could plant grasses on this bed, and I've shown you this at some of the other places that we had introduced you to. And again, I credit my ability to do this kind of thing, or my understanding of this kind of things, because I grew up around a lot of different cultures. And so in West Africa, he was using stakes on where he kind of wanted his beds, and then he would look at the shadows over the next couple of days, and then he would probably do some math, because what I know now is that the sun's at different positions over the course of the year. So he's doing some math in his head about where does he want these beds so we get maximum sun on the plants themselves, because the plant leaves need photosynthesis. And so if the plant's being shaded by another plant, we're not going to get the growth that we want or that we expect. And then another case, I went in and a lady said, a Chinese lady from a Chinese church I was attending. I used to be able to speak a little bit of Mandarin, but she wanted a garden bed, and she had managed to get a couple chip dumps. So she had logs and she had chips, and she wanted a garden bed that was a little bit easier on her back and would be something that she could go out and harvest more frequently. And so what I installed for her is raised garden beds, again, using the berm and basin concepts, where we would cut a notch in the ground. Now, she had established garden beds there, but we cut a notch in the ground. We rolled a log into that notch, and then I actually excavated the paths. See, right here, we've got stumps under here. There's no excavation that can be done, okay? So if I chop this path up, I'm gonna get like an inch or two, because there's literally wood chips and material under here. Plus, this is a very fungal soil. That's why we're gonna grow up instead of growing down, because very soon after we get down here, there's clay. Now, in her environment, she'd been gardening in a big, probably about 20 by 20 foot area. It was really soil. The problem was when it rained, and she's down in North Carolina, is that the paths were really, really muddy. So what I ended up doing is I dug my ditches and to put the logs in, and then I cleared the soil in the middle and threw it in the bed with the logs to give her kind of a raised bed, maybe 6 to 8 inches high. And then I hauled in wood chips, because she had a couple chip dumps. And I filled the paths in between with wood chips. Now, she wanted wide paths because she wanted to be able to push her little cart there. And her little cart had a seat on it, so she could push her cart out there and sit on the seat. Now, one thing I did notice that was interesting, she could be standing upright and bend all the way down and touch the ground. Now, it was a little more comfortable to touch something that's 6 inches off the ground than it was to touch the actual ground. But her mobility was informed or able, because for so many years it was about just bending over and picking greens. And what was interesting is after we got the beds up and going, I said, hey, do you want me to put rows or anything like that? She didn't understand the concept of the raised beds having rows or defined area for planting seed, she actually came out, poured all the seed she had into a bucket, and then broadcast the seed on the ground. Now, in hindsight, she knew that all the seeds she put in that bucket were for the season that's coming and needed to be planted at this time, and they were compatible height and all that other stuff. But again, she just broadcast those seeds on the bed. So when we do this bed here, we've got the ditches or the basins. I've chopped up what's inside the area so that we've got a little bit of aeration, because I just kind of want to see what's under this waste hay and goat manure. And let's look at what we're working with here. So I don't need to add fertilizer. I've got goat manure, I've got hay, I've got wood chips, I've got all that material. But again, it's a little bit fungal. You can see the fungus everywhere. So I want to grow up and mature the beds rather than dig down and just push down the beds. I want the biology more than anything else. So in this case, what we're going to end up doing is broadcasting corn and squash and beans on this bed here. That's the Three Sisters method. Now, there's been some controversy around the Three Sisters methods. Personally, I like it. I like to get all the seeds in at the same time, and I don't really care if it all grows or doesn't grow, because again, I'm looking for that soil cultivation in the sense of building up biology in the soil, and planting something is better than planting nothing. Now on this bed here, we're going to put the bush beans. Bush beans are nitrogen fixing, and we're going to probably put some squashes or whatever can continue in this season. It's July right now, and we're having a lot of rain and a lot of heat, so whatever can grow there. And then this bed right here, we'll put the kitchen garden, which will have kangkong. It'll have root vegetables. I actually do have some potatoes over there, so there might be some potatoes in there. Now again, I can only go down about 3 to 4 inches in the soil, because below this soil is clay, wood chips. Remember, if you watch the past videos, this is what it looks like underneath. And that's what it would look like with no goats or cultivation. The goats are doing the cultivation. The goats are what made this area not grow back crazy. So this front garden will be the lowest. The garden down, it's a little bit down slope, but it's also further back from where the sun's coming from is going to be the highest. Now, I said I'd talk about why this bed is covered with grass. This one's not, that one's not. Well, here's the thing. I don't know if you remember, but there's a very popular video, I'll link to it in the description below, called the grass-fed garden. Now, the grass-fed garden is where we're going to take tall grass and grass that is allowed to grow out, because we want the roots in the soil. A lot of folks say, hey, your place is messy and there's stuff growing everywhere. Exactly. I want stuff growing everywhere. Well, we had goats in this area here eating down the overgrowth. This overgrowth was almost as tall as the cattle panels, and the goats knock it down, they eat it, they manure on it, they urinate on it, they make a mess of it. And now that they've been excluded from it, I'm going through with a rake and scooping up all the materials that are loose grass and such, like this long cut grass, and we're using it to mulch the beds. Now, long cut grass is my preferred mulch for beds. Why is that? Number one is it provides paths for fungal and bacterial activity. So that long stem, things will grow into that stem, and they'll start colonizing that stem, and they'll start breaking down the lignin and all the materials that are in there and the fibers. And so that's going to spread through the garden itself. It also works like a wicking bed. So moisture can move through the paths of the long stuff. So when we have grass like this, we have an environment, a network that allows the growth. Now we can also use, and I got a couple piles all the way on the end over there, we can also use the hay that maybe got rained on, or the straw that comes out of their shelter. This particular shelter is going to get another fresh bale of straw. Now, straw doesn't have any seeds in it. It tends to be wheat straw, sorghum straw, something like that. So even if it did have seeds and grows, doesn't really hurt anything. But hay could have weed seeds and a lot of different other things that we don't necessarily want here. However, if the hay has been picked through by the goats and they've laid in it and they've peed on it and they pooped on it and you turned it a few times and let the chickens get through it, that material is suitable for a long mulch on the beds. Could you use pine needles? Because pine needles is something that's kind of long. You could use pine needles, but pine needles are going to make the soil more acidic. Now, this particular set of soil is pretty acidic because it's primarily wood chips. So I am going to add some lime to these beds after I get the seed down. I'll add some lime to it before we get going. The rain will wash that lime in. But essentially, I scratch up the surface. I have clearly defined trenches on the outside edges. Those are our basins. They're going to slow and spread water. Remember, we started with, I'm going to pour this out. They're going to slow and spread water, and they're going to soak that water into the slightly raised bed, which acts as a wicking system to pull things up. And then to keep the materials from evaporating completely, we have mulch on the top. So the wide path lets me just fling over the fence a bunch of straw or hay or whatever. We actually have some rotten straw bales over there that we're going to use. And I can spread that material out and then use the fork to flip it onto the beds. A lot of times you do want to put dry materials around existing plants. So if there are plants growing here, I'd want to put dry materials around it. Now, is this suitable for a large area? Like if this entire area was garden beds because the goats were someplace else, is it suitable? Well, number one, I made this small because if I do need to let the goats out and give them more space after I clean this wood pile up, I want to be able to just move that fence over and still have access to here. But it doesn't matter if these beds are, I think we're looking at about 8 feet here on each of these. Oh, actually 16 feet because the fences are, it's about 8 feet. I don't know. It doesn't matter how long they are. If they were 300 feet, as long as they're on contour, as long as the materials are layered over time, they're perfectly fine. Now, would we ever grow in between the beds? Well, we would. These can be permanent raised beds, but in between the beds could be a grain crop, for example. Again, this is reflecting back on the silvopasture. And you could walk down footpaths. So right now we've got a wheelbarrow path, but later, if we have just footpaths, you could walk down the footpaths, but grains, if they were growing in the middle, are cut with the scythe and they're cut on the ground, and you're only cutting maybe a 4 to 6 foot width. So you would be able to effectively cut in between here. Now, I've talked a lot about seed balls in the past because this video is about showing you how berms and basins are the foundation of every method or style of gardening or gardening at scale. Because again, it slows and spreads the water. It helps us maintain soil. It helps us build up soil biology and help build up soil organic matter. But ultimately, even the one straw revolution method is done in a giant basin. So most rice fields are slightly lower than the areas around them because they're in areas with heavy rains. And so when the heavy rain comes, it spreads out on the level rice field, waters the plants. And the seed ball method that's used with that allows you to deliver those seeds everywhere, and you're going to have better growth. So I could decide that this entire area is one raised bed. Now, would I trench around the outside? Not necessarily. I would actually, in this case, because we're on a hill and we don't have a level area, I might cut level basins. But again, this is a goat system primarily. But ultimately, if I were to seed ball the whole area and end up with a little bit of everything everywhere, or we're doing a lot of grains, I'd end up like what we have down there. And see, that area would be overgrown. I would go in and do my harvest. I might take out the straw and use it in the goat shelter.